The early 2000s were a fascinating time for Apple. The iMac G3 was still going strong, but change was in the horizon. By mid-2001, Apple was preparing to turn the page, but not before releasing one final version of the all-in-one Mac that started it all. In this episode, we're taking a deep dive into the iMac G3 Snow, the last of its kind and one of the rarest iMac G3s ever made. We'll cover the history behind this unique model, walk through a full teardown and restoration, run benchmarks to see how it performs today, and even fire up a few classic games that defined the early Mac experience. Whether you're here for the nostalgia, the hardware, or to see if a 2001 iMac can still put up a fight, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. When Apple launched the original iMac G3 in 1998, it was a turning point. With its Bondi blue translucent case, USB-only ports, and an all-in-one design, it stood out from anything else on the market. More importantly, it sold fast. The iMac G3 was a massive commercial success, moving over 6 million units and playing a key role in Apple's dramatic comeback under Steve Jobs. Over the next 3 years, Apple kept refining the iMac G3 through multiple hardware revisions and design refreshes, a total of 13 official configurations, introducing faster processors, new ports, and an ever-changing palette of colors ranging from vibrant fruit tones to more subdued professional shades. But by mid-2001, the iMac G3 was approaching its final act. The final act was the iMac G3 600 Snow, released in July 2001 alongside a matching graphite model. Snow marked a stylistic departure from early color-splashed designs like Flower Power and Blue Dalmatian, instead opting for a smooth, opaque, white finish that felt cleaner and more refined. It featured a 600 MHz PowerPC G3, 256 megabytes of RAM, a CDRW drive, and a 15-inch CRT display, all built into the same iconic bubble enclosure that had become synonymous with Apple's resurgence. This was the last iMac G3 ever released. Sold exclusively through Apple's retail and online stores, the Snow version is now one of the rarer variants and represents the very end of the G3's colorful journey. Just months later, Apple would unveil the radically redesigned iMac G4, a complete reinvention of the all-in-one Mac that traded the CRT for a floating flat panel display. I actually covered that machine in a previous video, so if you want to see where Apple went next, I'll put a link above to check that out. In that sense, the Snow iMac is more than just a color refresh. It's a swan song for the computer that saved Apple. The first Snow iMac G3 from 2001 that I'm working on had a blown power supply board, so I ended up picking up another iMac G3 that was working, but the outer case was badly damaged. So now what I'm going to do is take the good parts from both machines and put them together to create a great example of the Snow iMac G3. To get started, I placed a towel down on the desk to protect the CRT and laid the iMac face down on it. I'll be using my iFixit Pro toolkit. This thing has been reliable for over a decade, and I'll drop a link in the description if you want to pick one up for yourself. First, I removed the bottom plate. It's held in with just 4 Phillips screws. Once the plate was off, I removed the RAM door. Next, I removed the EMI cover. There are 3 screws on the back and 1 screw near the center of the power supply, totaling 4 screws. Once those were out, the EMI shield lifted off easily. From there, I started disconnecting the hard drive power cable from the logic board, along with the IDE data cable. Now it was time to remove the logic board and the down converter board. I took out the 6 screws holding the logic board in place and the 5 screws securing down the converter board. Once all the screws were out and the cables were disconnected, I gently lifted both boards out of the computer. Make note that you have to lift them both out. They're designed to both be lifted out together. The down converter board from this iMac was the part that malfunctioned, so it's going to be replaced with the working one inside the second unit. Next, I removed the DVD and hard drive carrier. It's held in place by 4 screws, 2 on each side. Once those were out, I tilted it forward and lifted it straight out. To remove the front bezel, I started by releasing the 2 tabs on the front. Beneath those tabs, I found 2 screws that also needed to come out. After removing them, I used a plastic tool to gently pull outward on the bezel unit until it popped off. The plastic on these iMacs is known to be brittle, and this one was no exception. Cracks were forming near the microphone, chunks were falling off, and that is a known weak spot on all iMac G3s, as the plastic becomes fragile and prone to chipping with age. Then I moved on to the top rear housing. I released the 2 tabs on top, then removed the 2 screws hidden underneath. With those out, the rear shell lifted off easily. With everything disassembled, I set the damaged iMac aside and turned my attention to the DVD drive. I unscrewed the 4 screws holding the DVD drive to the DVD drive carrier and removed the adapter board, which was secured with 2 more screws. I then opened the drive by removing 2 small screws, 1 from each side on the front, so that I could inspect the internals. The first thing that caught my eye was the rubber band that drives the mechanism for loading and ejecting discs was very worn and had some dry rot, looked like it was about to break. And that explains why the drive had a hard time receiving and ejecting discs. So what I went ahead and did was replace the rubber band with a new one I picked up on Amazon, which I'll link in the description below. After installing the new band, I sprayed the inside of the drive with compressed air to clear out any dust or debris, and then reassembled the unit. After repeating the same teardown steps on the second iMac, I installed the 600 MHz logic board from the damaged iMac into the better conditioned chassis. The working donor machine had a 500 MHz logic board, so this swap gave us a nice little performance boost. I also installed the refurbished DVD drive and replaced the old spinning hard drive with a 120 GB SSD using an IDE to SATA adapter. Both the SATA adapter and SSD are also linked in the description if you're planning to do this same upgrade on your iMac G3. As I flipped the computer back upright, I noticed the front bezel was cracked and missing plastic near the microphone. So I swapped it with the bezel from the broken iMac. The removal process was the same as before, but I made sure to be extra careful this time to avoid damaging the fragile clips underneath. Before reassembling everything and putting the EMI shield back on, I installed a brand new PRAM battery. I also combined the highest capacity RAM sticks from both machines to bring the total up to 768 megabytes. And to ensure a solid connection, I gave the RAM pins a quick clean with a pink rubber eraser. With the RAM installed, the case cleaned up, and all the internals swapped and secured, the iMac was finally ready to power on for the first time. With the upgrades installed, it's time to see the SphereScale results and just how much performance has improved. This iMac G3 Snow is evaluated using SphereScale version 2, which applies to PowerPC Macs running macOS 10.4 through 10.5. This version of the SphereScale pulls from Geekbench 2, Xbench 1.3, and Cinebench 2003, giving us a comprehensive look at CPU, memory, disk, and graphics performance for early OS X era Macs. Starting with Geekbench 2, the total score increased from 180 to 297, a 65% improvement. Integer performance rose from 249 to 378, and floating point came from 200 to 344. These gains came not just from the SSD and RAM, but also a full CPU upgrade, replacing the original 500 MHz PowerPC G3 with a faster 600 MHz G3. While it's only a 100 MHz bump on paper, it clearly made a real difference in system responsiveness and number crunching power. Moving on to Xbench, we saw some of the most dramatic changes in disk performance. The original hard drive scored just 24.77 in the disk test, dragging the overall system score down to 13.43. After installing an SSD, the disk test score skyrocketed to 70.35, bringing the overall score up to 15.13. That's nearly a 3-time speed boost in storage, instantly noticeable in boot times, app launches, and general usability. Graphics saw modest gains as well. Quartz performance increased from 18.15 to 20.04, and OpenGL rose from 38.46 to 44.46. These improvements came without changing the GPU, meaning the upgraded CPU, faster RAM access, and SSD helped reduce overall system strain, letting the graphics subsystem operate more efficiently. Lastly, Cinebench 2003 showed a jump in rendering power, with noticeable improvements in both Cinema 4D rendering and OpenGL shading. While this machine isn't built for 3D workloads by today's standards, the upgrades made it much more capable of handling creative tasks from its own era. So what do all these numbers mean? Simply put, this iMac G3 Snow went from a sluggish and outdated computer to surprisingly usable. The combination of a faster processor, maxed out RAM, and solid-state storage brought it back to life. And while it'll never match modern Macs, obviously, for retro computing and classic Mac OS X use, it's now a smooth, enjoyable experience once again. The version 2 SphereScale performance score is calculated using a blend of Geekbench 2, Xbench, and Cinebench 2003 results, with weighted emphasis on CPU, RAM, storage, and GPU performance, all based on what matters most for a balanced PowerPC computing experience in Mac OS X. With its 600 MHz PowerPC processor and Mac OS 10.4.11, the upgraded Snow iMac G3 managed a SphereScale performance score of 86. That lands it squarely in the lower middle tier of all PowerPC Macs I've tested. But context here matters. I ran the same iMac before the upgrade when it still had the original 500 MHz G3. That configuration scored just 52 on the SphereScale performance score, making the jump to 86 a massive leap for just 100 megahertz difference. The performance gain comes not only from the extra clock speed, but also the more efficient L2 cache in the 750CX chip, and likely some benefit from the maxed out RAM and a clean OS install. Just above the Snow iMac sits the PowerBook G4 400 Titanium, which scored 96. Despite having a G4 processor, its lower clock speed and early architecture only gave it a modest lead, showing how efficient the 750CX G3 could be for lightweight workloads. Stepping up further, the PowerMac G4 Quicksilver 733 MHz scored 107. It's notable that a much faster desktop-class G4 system only outpaces the Snow iMac by 21 points, especially considering the iMac's compact form factor and aging motherboard design by this time. On the other side of the scale, I tested a different configuration of the PowerBook G4 400 Ti, scoring just 55, and the iBook G3 clamshell 466 MHz also landed a 55, putting both well behind the upgraded Snow. Even its own stock configuration with the original 500 MHz CPU only managed a 52. That alone underscores how much of a real-world difference the 600 megahertz upgrade made to usability and performance. Now, an 86 on this scale might not sound impressive, especially when compared to later PowerMac G4 and G5 systems, but for a G3-based all-in-one from 2001, it's more than respectable. And paired with that iconic snow design, this model perfectly captures Apple's bridge between the classic Mac era and the dawn of OS X. If you're curious about how this iMac stacks up against other machines, you can check out the full list of SphereScale benchmarks and retro SphereScores in the spreadsheet linked down in the description. It's updated regularly with every system I test. And if you want to contribute your own results, you can now submit benchmarks from your vintage Mac by filling out the submittal form that's also linked below. I'll even link a video above that walks through the process step by step of submitting your benchmarks, so you can get involved in the project and maybe even see if your machine is featured in a future video. Now let's break down the SphereScore for the iMac G3 Snow. And remember, this rating system evaluates more than just raw speed. It's all about the build, design, upgrade potential, historical impact, and how collectible the machine is today. Build quality, it gets a score of 3 out of 5. The translucent polycarbonate shell still feels solid by early 2000s standards, but time hasn't been too kind to these enclosures. Cracks, yellowing, and brittle plastic are all too common now. It's sturdy for what it is, but definitely not bulletproof. Aesthetic and design, it receives a 3 out of 5. The snow white color is clean, minimal, and has a more grown-up feel compared to the original Bondi blue or lime green. But that also means it's a little less fun. It doesn't pop the way earlier G3s did. And while it holds up visually, it's not what most people picture when they think of an iconic iMac. Expandability and upgrade potential, 2 out of 5. Upgrades are technically possible. I bumped mine to a 600 megahertz CPU and maxed out the RAM, but it's far from easy. No GPU slots, no CPU socket, and even simple upgrades require a full teardown. It wasn't meant to be opened up regularly. Historical significance, 4 out of 5. This is the end of the road for the iMac G3 line. By the time Snow rolled out, Apple was already working on the G4 iMac. So while it didn't introduce anything new, it represents the final chapter of an era. And for that alone, it earns serious historical credit. Legacy and collector value, 2 out of 5. Snow models are cool, but they don't get the same love as Bondi Blue, Graphite, or the Flower Power editions. They're easier to find and a little more under the radar. Collectible, yes. Coveted, not really. The final SphereScore comes out to 14 out of 25. Not a powerhouse, not the flashiest, but as the swan song of one of Apple's most important product lines, the Snow iMac absolutely earns its place in vintage Mac history. I decided to kick the gaming off with a classic from my elementary school days, Oregon Trail 2. I remember playing this on one of those Bondi Blue iMacs back around 2000 or 2001, and I haven't touched it since. So naturally, I was excited to fire it up and relive some of those childhood memories. Starting the game, you have to make a few choices. This is the official trail journal of CircuitSphere. Figured I'd name it after the YouTube channel, of course. I decided to roll with being an adventurer. Honestly, I don't remember the pros and cons of each role anymore, but back in the day, I knew it all by heart. Anyway, we're winging it here. Adventurer it is. Formerly a gunsmith, I figured a trade like that would come in handy on the Oregon Trail. I mean, being a banker, I don't see how that helps out in the West. I set my departure for May of 1848 and chose to start in Nauvoo, heading towards the Great Salt Lake City. Might as well recreate the journey my ancestors took to get here. I've got sharpshooting skills, $1,500 in cash, and naturally, I picked the biggest wagon available, worth $100. My crew, Lucy, 45, Karen, 35, Elva, who's 10, and Tad, who's 12. I'm assuming it's a wife, maybe her sister, and 2 kids. Or, hell, maybe it's 2 wives. It's 1848 after all. Right off the bat, we land into Nauvoo, and I'm completely lost. I forgot everything about what to do, so I wandered around aimlessly for a bit until I figured out how to prepare. First stop, the stables, to pick up horses and oxen. Then I hit the gunsmith, loaded up on guns and bullets. I mean, growing up in Utah taught me you can never have too many guns or bullets. Then it was over to the drugstore for all sorts of mystery tonics and spices from back in the day. Talked to some of the town folk. One guy told me I should have left in April. Well, it's too late now. I'm a May man. Another lady seemed eager to join the party, but I passed. I didn't want any extra mouths to feed. Bought more essentials at the general store, ignored another person's doubts about traveling, grabbed some clothes, and we're off. First challenge, crossing the Mississippi River. I checked conditions, took the ferry, made it across just fine. Then surprise, yours truly was elected captain. I mean, of course, leadership just runs in my blood. It just seems like only video games ever recognize that. Next came another river. Took the ferry again, found an abandoned wagon, naturally. I pillaged and looted the thing. Then we stopped at a way station to restock. Unfortunately, sweet Elva caught a bad cold, so I slowed the pace and kept her hydrated. The wagon got stuck. Then a severe thunderstorm hit. I waited it out because the thunder never scared me. Eventually, we reached a Native American village, and I did some trading to keep relations good. Don't want to be hunted down while we travel west. But sadly, even with all the care, my sweet Elva passed away. We kept going, made it to Canesville, talked to some locals, bought a few more things, and pushed on. At the Missouri River crossing, I took the ferry again. We saw strangers ahead and decided to wait and see what they'd do. Turns out they just moved on peacefully. To the next river, I got cocky and decided to ford it. Ended up being a bad call, swamped the wagon, and I had to clean up the mess. Then cholera hit. Poor Lucy got it. I upped her rations and let her get rest for a couple days. Then came a hailstorm, so I slowed down. Thunderstorm, slowed down. Flooded trail, got advice, decided to forge ahead. Wagon got stuck again, but I double teamed the animals and got us through. At Pawnee Village, I did more trading. Then came a brutal heat wave, thunderstorms, mosquitoes, more heat, a broken axle wheel. Thankfully, I had spare parts. Dust storms, deep ravines, a prairie fire, then more strangers ahead. Here's where I made a big mistake. I waited to see what they'd do. They approached us, seemed lost, and I broke my rule. I let one tag along. I even traded with him, thinking I was being a good guy. Next morning, boom, wagon theft. Tried to catch the thief, no luck. All we could do was move on. More extreme heat. At that point, I decided to do some hunting. First attempt didn't do great, but then I scored a deer and a duck. Problem is, I forgot you can't carry it all back. Wasted a ton of meat. Then we found some wild fruit, did more hunting, made the same mistake again, killed 768 pounds of game and could only carry 169. Oops, my bad for wasting. Eventually made it to Fort John. Talked to folks, stocked up, and I was down to my last $40. Still, we pressed on. Then I talked to a Native American woman who reminded me not to just kill everything and leave it to rot. Then it clicked. So I went hunting again, this time more responsibly. Shot one bear, 128 pounds, carried all of it back. But then, right after crossing the river, the game crashed. No autosave, this is old school. I logged back in and saw that I'd have to start over, so I guess that's where the journey ends for now. Still, I absolutely loved revisiting Oregon Trail 2. It's been years, but I fully intend to come back to it and finish the trail properly next time. The next game I decided to try was Civilization 2. I actually got this as part of a random eBay lot full of Macintosh games. Heads up here, it's going to be very obvious that I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. I've never played any of the Civilization games before, so this is my first dive in. I'm excited. Hopefully I can catch on quick. So I fired up a new game, and the first thing it asked me was the world size. Naturally, I went with the largest map, because go big or go home, right? Then I picked the difficulty level. I chose Warlord, which is just one level above the easiest. Again, no clue what I'm doing. Then it asked how many civilizations I wanted to compete against, and I picked 3. Figured that'd be manageable for a first-timer. After that, I had to choose the barbarian activity level. I went with restless tribes. I don't even know what that means, but it sounded spicy. I used standard rules, said I'm a male, and obviously I chose to play as the Romans, because if you're going to take over the world, you might as well be Caesar Augustus. I even selected the classical forum as my city style, just to stay on theme. Once the game loaded, I started with this little guy. I later figured out was a settler. Moved him around a bit to get a feel for the controls, and then the game prompted me to build a city. So I did, and thus Rome was born. From there, I opened up the menus and decided to start training some warriors for defense. The science advisor popped up and suggested we work on masonry, so I went with that. I moved my settler a bit more to explore and then built a road. At this point, I started producing more military troops and sent them out to uncover more of the map. Eventually, the game prompted me to build another city, so I created one called Veii. I think that's how it's pronounced, I have no idea. Sent more troops out exploring and even discovered the secret of ceremonial burial, which I'm assuming is a good thing. Then something cool happened. I got recognized for my years of enlightened leadership. Once again, here goes these video games recognizing me for leadership. And they gave me an addition to my throne room, which I didn't know I had. I got a nice chair, so yeah, things were going pretty well. I kept expanding, exploring, and connected Veii to Rome and with another road. I stationed some troops around the city for defense and then went on to build a third city, Antium. Next, I decided to build some boats. Sent my little ship out to explore the seas, but I quickly discovered that if you end your turn too far from land, your ship can just, disappear lost at sea. Yeah, my first ship was lost. My bad. Sent out a second ship and did a bit more exploring, and then finally some action. A barbarian uprising happened near Rome. Luckily, I had some troops fortified nearby. They came at me. I took out 2 of them, and the last one ran off, which was smart because I would have taken him out too. Sent another ship out for more exploration, lost that one too. Then boom, another barbarian uprising. Once again, my troops were ready and took care of it swiftly. Somewhere along the way, I discovered banking and got yet another throne room upgrade. My palace was really starting to come together. I did a bit more exploring with my ship. Rest in peace to all my other boats. And after that, I decided to wrap up the game. Now look, I totally get it. If you want to make fun of my gameplay down in the comments, I'll probably even join in and make fun of it as well. It was pretty rough. I've got a lot to learn when it comes to the Civilization world and Civilization 2 in particular. But honestly, I had a blast. I definitely plan to come back to this one when I have more time to give it a proper go. Bringing the iMac G3 Snow back to life wasn't just about swapping parts. It was about restoring a piece of Apple history. As the final version of the iconic iMac G3, the Snow model marks the end of an era. A clean, refined send-off to a design that helped turn the company around. With the right upgrades, a faster CPU, maxed out RAM, and solid-state storage, this machine went from sluggish to surprisingly responsive for its time. While it can't compete with later G4 or G5 systems, it still holds its own as a capable retro macOS experience, and one I'm truly excited to have in my collection. If you've enjoyed diving into this restoration and want to see how other vintage Macs stack up, check out the SphereScale benchmark spreadsheet linked in the description. You can explore every score I've recorded. And even better, don't forget you can submit your own results from your own Mac using the form also linked below. For collectors, tinkerers, and retro computing fans, the iMac G3 Snow is a machine worth remembering. Not just for how it looks, but for what it represents in Apple's comeback story. If you like this episode, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and consider supporting CircuitSphere to keep these deep dive videos rolling. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.